Hello everyone, you are very welcome to EnglishLogica.com. Throughout this video, we'll cover different ways to politely interrupt another member of staff in different situations. Never interrupt unless you have something of value to add. It's satisfying as an English speaker when you can successfully interrupt a conversation and make a prepared contribution, thus appreciating the natural ebb and flow of a conversation. Whether the scenario is an office meeting, presentation, or just a good chat with some friends, you can use the following conversation breakers as a starting point. Imagine you are in a meeting and one of your colleagues has gone off on a tangent about next month's targets. You could politely interrupt by saying things like, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I just butt in for a second? I just need to interrupt for a second. Can I stop you there for a moment? Just a moment, I'd like to say, excuse me for interrupting, but..." You can also say, "I don't mean to interrupt, but..." And although you very much do intend to interrupt, this is simply a polite way of interrupting that works best when you have a point to make quickly before the conversation changes, or when other members of the conversation are deep in a discussion but you'd still like your point to be heard. Now, imagine you are sitting in a brainstorming session and your colleagues are throwing out all kinds of ideas and you can barely get a word in. You can politely jump into the conversation by saying, "Before we move on to the next point, may I add? Before we move on, I'd like to say something. Do you mind if I jump in here? Let me jump in. Do you mind if I come in here? May I add something quickly?" Now, let's say you are sitting in a presentation. You didn't quite understand the last point the speaker made. If you leave it until the end, you might forget your question. You need to interrupt. "Sorry, could you explain that a little more? Could you clarify that last point before we move on? Would you mind explaining that a little more? I'm sorry, you couldn't explain a little clearer, could you? Could you clarify that?" These examples are polite and considerate for the speaker and the room. Politeness is professional. After you've asked for clarification, the presentation resumes. You've been taking notes, but the speaker is speaking rather quickly. You need to ask them to wait. "Just a minute. Can we just pause a second? Sorry, can I slow you down for just a moment? I'm sorry, can I just take down this point before we move on?" Let's say you're sitting around your office meeting table. Everybody is giving their opinion on a topic. You want to get involved. "If I could just come in here, could I just expand on that a little? Excuse me for interrupting, but I should add that I'd like to say that while we're discussing this, I have a point to make. If I can have the floor for a moment, Can I share an idea? During the office meeting, a staff member keeps going off topic. What ways could you bring the conversation back on point? Do you mind if we stay on topic? Sorry, could we keep to the point at hand, please? Sorry to interrupt for a second. Just going back to the main discussion. The office meeting goes on. You get a message on your phone from family and you have to leave as it's an emergency. What is the best way to approach this? I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to let you know I have to leave the meeting now. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I don't mean to be rude, but may I interrupt quickly? Let's say you want to assert some authority in your conversation after your interruption. Let's look at polite ways of going about this. As far as I'm concerned, personally, I believe, the way I see it, actually, or what about making a suggestion with your interruption? It would be interesting to, why don't we, how about, what about if you need to interrupt to end a conversation? Which avenue would be the most polite? I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, but I have to be at work for a meeting shortly and must get going. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but I just noticed the time and I need to get to work. These allow you to slip out of the conversation respectfully. These are some of the most common and polite ways of interrupting somebody else in a working environment. Have you any you could add? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to EnglishLogica or visit EnglishLogica.com for more important information to assist you towards career progression.